Florida firebrand Pam Bondi faces the Senate as she's trying to get confirmed as Trump's attorney general. Israel and Hamas reach a ceasefire agreement just before Inauguration Day, and the Supreme Court hears challenges to a Texas law protecting minors from illicit online content. We have those stories and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Welcome to the Chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Wednesday, January 15th. We're in the middle of Joe Biden's last week as president. Soak it in, everybody. This past Monday, he delivered a rambling speech about his foreign policy wins. Blaze senior politics editor Chris Bedford explained how his speech signified Biden's place in history as the world's most powerful placeholder. And he joins us now to discuss. So, Bedford, what do you think Biden is actually going to be remembered for his 4 years in office?
Well, that's it. Joe Biden is a footnote. Joe Biden is someone who will be remembered as a one-term president. Of course, those are pretty rare in the modern era of American politics. Bill Clinton won re-election. H.W. Bush, of course, goes down as someone who, despite his many accomplishments, is a one-term president. And Joe Biden is someone who had always wanted this office. I mean, he ran for president 4 times, each time doing not that great until really he got to South Carolina on the final push. And he was pushed forward by Jim Clyburn and others who in the Democratic leadership who were worried about running a radical against Donald Trump. He wasn't run because Joe Biden had the vision and the Democratic Party backing to really change America, to be someone like Barack Obama, who was pushed forward as an agent of change, to be someone like Trump, who was a self-styled agent of change. He was someone who was put there to defeat Donald Trump, and he was able to do it once. He thinks he could have done it the second time, but all of the polls and strategists seem to think completely differently from him on that. I mean, if you read some of his obituaries, his political career obituaries today in the New York Times, they're saying, well, he was wrong on a number of things. He was wrong on immigration, which of course is funny because the New York Times was so thoroughly supportive of him. He was someone who is going to symbolize where the Democratic Party has to take a turn away from some of these different things. He's also going to be remembered as someone, though, who kind of ended the neoliberal consensus that government ought to be small. Now, Barack Obama, of course, did a massive amount of this. He took over about a fifth of the U.S. economy with Obamacare. But Joe Biden was someone who pushed for a really muscular government involvement in our day-to-day lives. That's something that could potentially stick around. But it's almost tragic. It's like almost Kennedy-esque in its tragedy. He wanted, more than anything in life, the presidency of the United States of America. When he finally got it, he really wasn't there to even enjoy the fruits of his labor. He was someone who, for his trials, for his victory, for finally achieving it, he wasn't there, and he was eventually ejected by his party, literally. And at the end of the day, those same journalists who told us that he was going to be the warm embrace and a return to normalcy are nowhere to be found. Those vaunted American historians, presidential historians who claimed that he was next FDR, well, they're being really quiet right now. Over the last 4 years, thank God, voices like John Meacham have finally been marginalized and ignored to the level that they really ought to have been as just partisan hacks who have lazy sentence structure. These people who supported Joe Biden, who backed him, who built a legend around his administration, are nowhere to be found. And at the end of the day, after he gave that big, this is my final foreign policy speech, and despite being so traditionally wrong on foreign policy, he really does consider himself foreign policy aficionado. At the end of his speech, the best that they could muster was a foreign policy article that said he, quote, meant well. That's not exactly something that you want to be remembered as when you're the president. You want to be someone who does good, who does well. And that's not how it is. So at the end of the day, he got the office, and he ended up just being the most powerful placeholder. And even then, just for a time.
Chris, so true. I mean, we can't emphasize enough the extent to which he's always been this ham-fisted moron. And that's what he's been known as, in all seriousness, right, for a long time. And then you saw this kind of two-bit corruption that almost became sexy by the way in which it had to be hidden, because they did, in fact, rally around him to be president. But this is someone who, isn't even particularly ideological, who takes in a few $1 million for his family from China. God knows what other countries. I mean, it really is disgusting. But I want to say two things. One is, we do have to acknowledge that one of the ironic achievements, right? Like you said, it's like a fairy tale curse. You become president, but you lose your marbles and your party kicks you out. But one thing he did do at the end is he did give it a little FU to everyone who put him there, right? I mean, we do, by all accounts, have him going with Kamala over anyone else and making damn sure that he had some kind of agency on the way out. I don't know what we think about that as a legacy. And then number two, how do you think that other people will remember him? In other words, will the mainstream media, as you point out in the piece, will this become the dominant narrative? Like, will everyone just admit how bad he was moving forward, or will they cover that up?
I think that they'll kind of admit it. He'll have a Carter-esque legacy because he's someone who let them down in the end. I read one mainstream corporate outlet who said that Joe Biden was someone who ran over and over again, senator, vice president, defeated, came back, and he's not someone who's ever known how to say goodbye. He's never known when it was time for him to leave. They called it his Irish goodbye, finally, that he was gone. And that's something more than any people that Democrats cannot abide, is someone who loses them power. And Joe Biden's unwillingness to allow for a campaign, unwillingness to allow for new blood, unwillingness to, until it's dragged into the spotlight on the debate stage, but unwillingness to face the reality of his own mortality, is someone who's cost them power in a major way. Not only do you have Donald Trump back in office, but you have Donald Trump, Obi-Wan Kenobi style, more powerful than ever before. Donald Trump now backed by a broad array of technologists, big business, and intellectuals who really know what they're doing, as opposed to, well, you probably would have had Donald Trump won re-election or succeeded to the presidency in 2020. You would have had an inward-looking and paranoid second administration, one that was the same way he kind of ran that campaign, was correctly understanding that the whole world was out to get him, but because of that, was insular, paranoid, and self-focused, like you saw in his 2020 campaign, which is so markedly different from 2024. It's kind of, if you're a believer in providence, as I am, you notice throughout all biblical history that God doesn't use powerful people to his ends. He strikes them low. You could be the assistant to the Pharaoh, but he's not going to use you to free the Jews. He's going to send you out to the desert until you're an old man, someone who's been cast out without any position of authority before he sends you back in to use you. And Donald Trump had that time in the desert where the GOP turned on him, speeches from the floor. People like Mitch McConnell found their courage to attack him. Republicans thought he was in the rear view. And then he rose up, survived an assassination attempt, came back even stronger. So I think Joe Biden will not have nearly as long of a post office career as someone like Jimmy Carter did, where he had the time for that really to sanitize and Democrats to look back fondly on someone who, despite his many flaws, was probably a pretty good person. Joe Biden's not going to have that time to sanitize. So, well, I'm sure they will remember him with the classic Washington, D.C. tradition of 3, 4, 5 funerals and a whole big parade when he does shelf off his mortal coil. For now, he's persona non grata to a certain level. And they, to your point, have doubled down on that. He and his wife are bitter. They're angry. It was wild to watch the body language at Jimmy Carter's funeral when you had Joe Biden and his wife who don't like Kamala and Doug, who don't like Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton there who doesn't like anyone, Barack Obama, who could have been a very meddlesome post-presidency president, but instead seems to just be kind of laughing at the whole thing. He's done his job. He's out. He's got his house in the vineyard and his place in Hawaii, and wants nothing to do with these people chuckling in the corner with Donald Trump. There's so much infighting, so much personal animosity in that crew of Democratic leadership. It was wild to actually really catch it on camera. I wish we had a microphone.
I'm never going to forget Jill Biden in the red that she was wearing on Election Day. But now let's look at justice right now, because it's confirmation hearing season, and Pam Bondi was up today in front of the Senate. She's Donald Trump's pick for Attorney General. So let's go ahead and take a look at her.
Like the president, I believe we are on the cusp of a new golden age where the Department of Justice can and will do better if I am confirmed. Lastly, and most importantly, if confirmed, I will fight every day to restore confidence and integrity to the Department of Justice and each of its components. The partisanship, the weaponization will be gone. America will have one tier of justice for all.
There were several appointees that were going to in front of the Senate today. But what was your main takeaway from this one? This one's kind of the biggest one of the day.
Well, I think Democrats decided that they were probably not going to land that many punches on her. So you saw a lot of her hearing was a combination of attacking the nominee to head the FBI and attacking Donald Trump. And every Democrat, really, except for Mazie Hirono, who may be the Senate's least gifted senator, got that memo and wasn't attacking her. And the only thing that people really went at her, after her on was trying to elicit assurances that she would not try to investigate or punish any of the awful actors inside of our federal government over the last 8 years, any of the saboteurs of the Trump administration, any of the persecutors of political opponents. And she refused to give them that. I mean, Republicans went with a bold strategy here, kind of a lightning strike strategy, where because of some complete incompetence and paper screw-ups in the transition team and among the committees, they ended up with only one hearing yesterday for Pete Hegseth. So all Democrat fire could be focused on him. And even then, it was a discordant, disorganized attack. Everyone seems to go it their own way. The Democrats came off looking bad, and Pete Hegseth essentially secured the nomination. He would need 3 Republicans to vote against him. I think he's not going to end up having that problem. And then they're a little bit more tired. They don't have the energy to go after it. And Donald Trump's early push for nominees, early listing of people, and putting up folks who, by and large, are pretty qualified for this position, for their positions, seems to have sapped some of the Democrats' energy and will play in their favor.
Well, Chris, I hope she gets in easy, and I hope we see her really clean house from the get-go. We will be watching that very closely. I want to talk about one thing before we have to break soon here that Jill and I were talking about earlier, and that's kind of interesting. The Washington Post is reporting that Vivek is being encouraged by Donald Trump to take J.D. Vance's Senate seat, or that Trump is pushing that. And that's it's sort of funny to me, because a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, that was the plan for Vivek. I mean, I thought he was going to run for Senate in Ohio, or when it became clear he would be a front runner to be appointed or run for that position. I mean, this is Washington Post. What do you think about this?
About 60 seconds, Bedford.
Vivek's a gifted orator, and he's certainly a pit bull. But his explosion on Twitter and his basically essential silence on social media and in public circles since is because he really stepped in it with the H-1B discussion he's not actually in line. And he seems to have exposed himself with a lot of people for what I think he always has been, which is someone who's very interested, first and foremost, in fame and in personal advancement. So he's soured a lot of people. And Donald Trump was one of the original people who really couldn't stand him, but has since obviously he's grown on him. He's been a loyal soldier. I could see that happening in the end, but I'm kind of doubtful that Governor DeWine and the larger MAGA support are going to end up lining up behind him. I mean, if it happens, then he'll get that support, but I still think it's a long shot.
Bedford, thanks so much. We'll catch you again tomorrow.
See you then.
Matthew, when you look at Vivek, you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, Chris said it, not me. Tell me what you really think. I think it was well said. I mean, I think Vivek, very quickly found the limelight and appeared to enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with that. He's a good talker, and boy, he talked his way up into the highest of heights. So I do see this as a little bit of a correction for him going silent for some of the things he disastrously said on Twitter. We can talk about another time, but he's still very talented, and it'd be great if he got get a real job again, go to the Senate. That'd be perfect for someone like him. So I think he's hugely talented, but I do think this sounds like a little bit of a correction. And I don't know to what extent we're going to see him with Doge now.
Yeah, he talked enough to make Susie Wiles say, everybody else can't say anything else.
No more tweeting.
No more tweeting from anybody. But you know what? Stick around.
Only Elon can post all he wants.
Elon can do it because he owns X. So Susie knows she only has so much power there. But don't go anywhere. Our next guest will tell you what you need to know about the Gaza ceasefire coming up. We could see increased tariffs on our trade partners, tax cuts, and the regulation changes, but we know why gold is a big diversification tactic now more than ever. And Birch Gold is releasing their ultimate guide for gold in the Trump era, and the foreword is written by Donald Trump Jr. So if you want a free copy along with Birch Gold's free information kit on gold, just text my name, Jill, to the number 989898. And we know the facts, right? The national debt continues to increase. Our interest payments on the debt continue to increase, and gold is still going to be your hedge against a weakening dollar. Birch Gold can help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold. Text Jill to 989898 for your free copy for the ultimate guide for gold in the Trump era. There's no obligation. It's only going to be information. They have an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau and countless 5-star reviews and thousands of happy customers, so you too can trust Birch Gold. Text my name, Jill, to the number 989898 today. Well, there's big news out of the Middle East. According to U.S. and Israeli officials, Israel and Hamas have reached an agreement to reportedly release 33 hostages in Gaza and establish a ceasefire, which is set to begin on Sunday. But it's being met with mixed reviews. So here to break this all down for us is Jim Hanson. He's the president of WorldStrat and the chief editor for Middle East Forum. So Jim, this is a hostage deal, but it's not an end to the war. So what should we be taking away from this right now?
I think at some level, Hamas has achieved a tactical victory. They are getting an incredible amount of their own prisoners, murderers, terrorists, and other reprehensible people released for a fairly small number of Israeli hostages. And I think this is due to pressure from the Trump administration. They wanted to have a deal done, as the president so forcefully put it, before January 20th, or all hell was going to break out. And I think this is going to at least satisfy that to start with, but I don't believe it's going to lead to the peace they need and to the kind of hostage deal that the Israelis actually need.
Jim, I know that people both like to share blame and take credit in Washington, D.C., but in this case, who does get the credit, especially given what Biden said earlier today, which we should take a listen to?
Thank you.
Books credit for this, Mr. President, you or Trump?
Is that a joke? Oh, thank you.
Is that a joke?
Well, yeah, there's a joke there. It would be that old shuffling lummox leaving the scene. Joe Biden did everything wrong that it was possible for his administration to do, other than cutting off all weapon supplies to Israel. They pressured them continually to go ahead and back off from the needed destruction of Hamas and removal from them as any type of a governing or power base in Gaza. So I think at this point, the credit that the Biden administration gets is forcing Israel into a position where this was the best deal they could do. And the Trump administration incoming and Donald Trump himself gets credit for forcing it to happen in a very immediate time frame, setting a standard for his new administration.
Yeah, and I go back to the point where you made, where Donald Trump said, if the hostages aren't back in time, by the time I get in office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. Well, Joe Biden has had 15 months to deal with this situation. Of course, this is now 5 days away from the inauguration. When I first thought of this, when I first saw, before we were able to dive into anything and read the actual deal, the actual ceasefire that was proposed, I thought, man, doesn't this remind you of Ronald Reagan when he was out there with the Iranian hostage situation? As soon as he got in office, the hostages were released. Now, the details tell a little different story in this. But what do you expect this to really just kick off a Trump administration and peace through strength?
I think it says exactly those words you just mouthed per Ronald Reagan. Enemies and tyrants around the world should be scared of the United States. If they're not, we're doing something wrong. And we've been doing something wrong for the past 4 years. The Biden administration has exuded weakness in every way possible, and tyrants around the world, from Putin to the Iranians to Hamas, Hezbollah, all the other proxies of the Iranian regime, have taken advantage of that. Now, before he's even in office, from Mar-a-Lago, while playing golf, President Trump has been more substantial in forcing, compliance of some sort from our enemies. I think this deal will fall apart in the second phase, and then the hell that President Trump was promising will come to the rest of Hamas. But it also shows that when he puts his foot down, tyrants listen.
Yeah, Jim, let's zero in on that, because that was my next question. Yeah, there's a deal that's coming, and it's coming because of Trump's mere presence and words before he takes office. But what are the chances that this actually is signed, sealed, and delivered before he takes office? And even if that was in some way the case, it seems to me that when he gets into office, they might decide to fine-tune some details, because as you said in the beginning, this is actually a pretty good way for Hamas to save face.
Yeah, it will fall apart. There's no question. Hamas never deals straight. They have not, in their entire 75-plus year history of trying to push the Jews into the sea, played straight with the state of Israel. So what will happen is there will be some hostages released, thank God. And a lot of bad people will be released for the Palestinians. And then the next phase, after about 14, 15 days of this back and forth, is yet to be negotiated. So that will happen during a Trump administration. Hamas is not going to agree to the conditions required for a final agreement. And I think it's almost certain that Israel will roll back in, finish the military activity, and then start talking about what the days after kind of governance for the Gaza Strip will look like. It will not be Hamas.
Well, Jim, while we have you here, I want to ask you about other news, because we know that Joe Biden has recently released almost a dozen Yemenis from Guantanamo Bay, which includes 2 men who have served as bodyguards for Osama bin Laden. So what's the reasoning behind that decision?
If you didn't know any better, you could safely say that Joe Biden and his administration, and I don't think Biden's part of it at all, it's the people operating the Biden meat puppet, are doing everything they can to appease the enemies that they considered our allies through this 4 years. They had a completely false view of who our friends were and who our allies were. They're rewarding the bad guys as they leave, and basically pouring gasoline on all the fires they've left smoldering during their administration.
Well, let's move to Venezuela, where we have our favorite dictator, Maduro. This guy proposing invading Puerto Rico. He said recently that he has a liberation agenda. Jim, talk to us about this guy, because I'm making a joke, but how serious should we take this threat, and what should Trump do in this case?
I mean, this is our hemisphere. The Monroe Doctrine was important for a reason. We can't have crazy things like commies threatening to invade our territories happening in the Western Hemisphere. So I think whether or not, we end up with Canada, Greenland, Panama as the new north part of America, I don't think we're going to do any major activities in South America, but we're not going to tolerate people like Maduro creating chaos, causing issues with oil supplies and with global shipping and things like that. This is the era where the dangerous tyrants need to rein themselves back in. And I think he's probably just exercising his last few days of free craziness.
The world, they have to get it out while they still can there. Jim Hanson, thanks so much for joining us and for that great breakdown.
Pleasure.
I love it. Commies, they're over here. We can't let this happen. We are so close to a Trump inauguration.
Well, he
commies.
used the words. We have to have him back on the show. He used the words
Yes.
Monroe Doctrine, the phrase, which is something that we should remember. If there's any part of the world that we should care about, it's probably the one that we live in and the countries closest to us. So I don't want to intervene throughout the world, etc. But man, it would be nice if we actually paid attention to our own hemisphere.
Venezuela has oil. We can pay attention to them too. It's okay. When we come back, does protecting kids from explicit content interfere with the First Amendment? Our next guest will break down a landmark Supreme Court case. Next. Earlier today, the Supreme Court heard a case challenging a Texas anti-pornography law. It requires users to submit personal information online, but critics say it oversteps and it could wrongly affect adults and possibly even things like sex ed or movie scenes. So here to break it down for us is Clare Morell. She's a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. So Clare, thanks for joining us tonight. What were the arguments that were laid out against the Texas law in the courtroom today?
Yeah, so I was in the courtroom today for the oral arguments in this case, and the main thing that Texas was, I'm sorry, my earpiece fell. The main thing that Texas was arguing against the Texas law was that this was not the least restrictive means to protect children from online pornography. And so they were saying that instead parents should use filters. But the justices really got into it with this attorney for the petitioners, these pornography websites, and they said, wait a second, filters are not working for parents. Kids are seeing pornography, porn addiction is exploding. So for you to say that age verification laws is not the least restrictive means, this just isn't effective to protect kids. And so the main laws where they were trying to explain that filters would be less restrictive and that they were afraid that these laws would be restricting adults' access to pornography. And so those were the main arguments against the Texas law.
Clare, can you talk about this issue of free speech? First off, it's great to have you on the show. Clare was out here recently and we just missed each other, but I'm glad to have you on virtually here. Let's talk about the free speech issue, because this is something that's come up for, really the last 40 years of this garbage, where we have to bring in free speech when it comes to all these issues. So the law's challengers also argue that this is a violation. So lay the sides out for us.
Yeah, so this free speech issue is really an important one to pay attention to. And so this is the main challenge has been that these pornography websites, they should not be accessible for children. This is not protected speech when it comes to minors. And that's what the Texas law is trying to say, is that these porn websites can be accessible to adults. It's not trying to restrict adults' access. It's not trying to infringe at all on adults' free speech. But what the law does say is that this is about access for minors, and that children do not have access to obscenity. Obscenity is not protected speech, and this is in no way going to infringe on adults' rights to seeing this types of content. We're just trying to protect kids, and we're not even the law is not even saying certain kinds of content need to be taken down or restricted. It is specifically targeting access and access for children. And so there's nothing to say that adults can't have access to this kind of speech, and there's absolutely no infringement on free speech, period. And so that's really what is important to clarify in this case, because advocates on the other side are trying to raise alarm bells and say, oh no, they're coming for your speech. And that's just simply not the case. It's about protecting kids and keeping them from accessing this terrible obscenity online.
Well, submitting an ID, that's part of this case. And whenever I hear that, I can't help but think back to the presidential campaign and when Nikki Haley was out there trying to make it a whole thing on the campaign trail. Well, you're going to have to submit your ID to go and be online, and people are going to need to know who you are. Break it down for us in this case, how it would apply.
So you wouldn't actually have to submit an ID online. That is one method the Texas law makes available, but it actually leaves it up to the pornography websites to use different means. And it says you could also use digital ID, which states are increasingly moving towards. The state of Louisiana has a similar law and has a digital ID program where there is no information transferred whatsoever to the website. The digital ID program is able to just verify that this user is over 18 or not, and that process is done in less than 30 seconds and is completely anonymous. No information about the person is transferred to the site. And so our technology has advanced so much in the last 20 years since the last time the Supreme Court heard a law about age verification, and it means that age verification is now possible in a way that's super anonymous and convenient to adults and protective of their privacy. And so while government ID may be one method available, the Texas law explicitly makes other means available, like digital identification or even other they call commercially available means for age verification. And so there's plenty of ways for the pornography websites to comply with this law in a way that doesn't require adults to hand over their ID.
Claire, I want to talk about something else that you and I are both up to, but I do want to step back to bigger picture here and get your thoughts, because in a way, this whole debate is caused by technology in the first place, right? And it's interesting to me that this is the solution. Age verification is almost bringing back something that used to be in place. So, and that is, you weren't able to just, walk in to a store or turn on TV and access pornography as a child. When Old Man Peterson was growing up. I mean, you had to go through the double doors in the Blockbuster, right? You had to actually go in someplace where you could be seen, and it could be checked that you were of a certain age. And it's interesting because digital technology, this is where I want your thoughts, that got rid of that, right? And I've always wondered, why don't more people talk about the fact that the most popular channels on TV, if you will, to translate into an older age and boomer language, the most popular channels on TV, aka the most popular websites on the internet that everyone's accessing, are all of a sudden all hardcore pornography. I mean, there's a bunch of them. So it's like saying we created a system in which some of the stations everyone watches, ABC, CBS, right, the most popular websites online, are pornography with no checks whatsoever. Here, take a laptop and a phone, 7-year-old, right? Is that too cartoonish, or is that right?
No, that is exactly the problem that the court was trying to grapple with today, that our technology has advanced so much, but the law hasn't kept up. And so they were one of the justices, Justice Gorsuch, kept pressing in on this question. He said to the petitioner's attorney for the pornography websites that, are you trying to say we should have one constitutional regime for the real world and another constitutional regime for the digital world? He's like, I don't think that that's the goal. I think that our goal should be to have those be as equal as possible. And Justice Coney Barrett, the same, she pressed in and said, wait, are you saying there should be a different barrier online than there is for brick and mortar stores? And you're right, we have actually kept up better with television. And that case was raised in the courtroom today. It's FCC versus Pacifica, said that, listen, we can impose regulations on broadcast to make sure indecent shows aren't broadcasting during times that children are awake. And so we've allowed for restrictions in these other realms, but it hasn't kept pace. The law has not kept up with the digital realm, where now pornography is instantly available in children's pockets on smartphones 24/7. And the kinds of content on these sites are just absolutely horrific, violent, and dehumanizing. And so it's worse than ever. And so I actually was really encouraged in the courtroom today that the justices seem to totally recognize that the technology has changed so greatly and that we have not kept up with our laws. And it felt like they kept trying to make sure that there was going to be a path for this Texas law to be upheld, that there had to be a way for states to restrict children's access to obscenity, even as it's moved online, that is a compelling government interest to protect children from that, and that we need to make sure that the means are available to do this in the online world.
Very interesting. Changing times, and changing times for the better. We should talk about humanality a little bit. Something that I suppose I'm on the advisory board for, as you are, and multiple mutual friends have set up this nonprofit, and it's sort of an amazing story. I mean, it starts as scholarships for college kids who are willing to get off their phones, and it blossoms into something else entirely. So talk a little bit to us about humanality.
Humanality is amazing for those who haven't heard. And as you mentioned, it started as a college scholarship program to incentivize kids to give up their smartphones for a dumb phone, and originally was tied to a scholarship, but they found that the clubs were just exploding and the scholarships couldn't keep up, and kids were like, I don't even want the scholarship, I just want to get off my smartphone. And so now it's been replicated from that original campus at Franciscan University in Ohio to now, I think, almost 10 campuses, and it's rapidly expanding to more. And so it's amazing to see that college students are really hungry for a real life experience, for real friendships in the real world, and they recognize just how addictive their devices are. And so they're voluntarily choosing to give them up. And what's so inspiring about Humanality is that it's these clubs. It's a group of students doing this together, which I think just really speaks to the power of kind of collective action, that when we band together to resist these technologies, we can all be much more successful at opting out of these things. And so it's inspiring to see these college students gathering together to do this.
Yeah, and the goal is the intentional use of technology to live tech-free so that you can take over your life again. I mean, you should, I have to say, I don't know if I've talked to you about this yet, Jill, but it's unbelievable, the testimonials, right? In the beginning, Claire, you get students saying things like, they just needed the excuse. They knew it was a problem. They're much more aware of this destroying our society than older people. And the testimonials are like, yeah, I got off the phone. I'm so much happier. I got a girlfriend. I stopped looking at porn. I'm fishing all the time now. I gained a new hobby. I mean, it almost condemns the entire society when you see the desire for these kids to congregate around this issue, no?
They inspired me to give up my own smartphone. I went and spoke to one of these clubs and they said, well, do you have a smartphone? You talk about how bad these things are for us. And I thought, goodness, if these college kids can do it, so can I. And so I've opted out and gotten the Wise phone, which is great. And there's now so many options available. I try to explain this to parents when I'm telling them why they shouldn't give their teenager a smartphone, is there's other options available like the Light phone or the Wise phone or the Gab phone that has tools for communication that a child may need without all the addictive social media apps and an internet browser that can just suck them into an addictive world of online pornography, as was discussed heavily in the case today. I can't even remember how many justices brought up to the attorneys in the room that we're now in the world of smartphones, and it's just nearly impossible for a parent to keep up with filters to protect their kid when there are just thousands of portals to the internet in their pockets. And so it is really an inspiring movement.
Well, Claire, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And Matthew, when you guys are talking about getting rid of your smartphones, I'm like, this is why I don't have a Kindle. I just read an actual book because I need to get off my phone. And then I'll have weekends where I'm like, you know what? No phone, not going to be on it this weekend. Try and limit as much as possible because it's a real thing.
I mean, I'm still a hypocrite, I need to get off this thing. I'd love to change to a smart, I know that I can do it, right? I need to set a deadline and find one of those phones, but it's hard when your livelihood depends on it.
And you're the editor-in-chief and you're texting everybody in between breaks. You have a lot of stuff that you have to get done.
I mean, I would love to throw that phone into the ocean.
One day, that's the dream. When we come back, we'll bid a fond farewell to a poisonous food dye. Stay tuned. Get ready to say goodbye to a colorful but controversial ingredient in your favorite candies and snacks because the FDA has announced the plans to ban red dye number 3, citing long-standing health concerns, including links to cancer. We'll look at, how this might reshape the food industry with Hilary Kennedy. She's the BlazeTV host of the 4-Minute Buzz. So, Hilary, what does this red food dye, what effects does this have on us, and why is this so terrible?
Gosh, the list is a mile long of the effects. They've been difficult to prove, but on the whole, they've been linked to cancer, hyperactivity in children, rage, brain buzzing, sluggishness. I mean, there's a whole laundry list of things that they think are related to these food dyes.
I mean, what's crazy about this one is it's been around for a long time. I'm pretty sure people have known it's bad for you for a long time. And it's in random things like cough syrups, as if we need dye in cough syrups. So, I mean, is it at least some kind of symbol maybe of the problem? Because it is interesting to me, like, why now? Why are we doing this now? And aren't there a lot more, substances out there like this that we use all the time in our food.
Yeah, I think people are just waking up to this. So Kosterbeck is a great example. They color it to make it look more appealing, more fun, also identifiable, right? Like we know Pepto-Bismol is pink, like it's a branding thing. But I think people have started to realize, hey, this isn't healthy. Why is this in here? And one of the reasons that we are just now hearing about it is there hasn't been a lot of testing around this, right? Like a lot of the studies haven't been completely accurate. So what a federal appeals court ruled was that these dyes seem to be safe in small levels, and they pose a risk that's much less than, say, smoking cigarettes. So rather than try and ban them, because they said if we try and ban these, then we'll be taken to court over it. And without the scientific evidence to stand up in court, we're going to lose. So it almost hasn't been worth the fight to them. If they're in these little small quantities, then they don't seem to think it's worth trying to fight all these companies who are going to bring lawsuits.
We know this is part of MAHA, right? Everybody is ready to make America healthy, but Senator Tommy Tuberville has actually been championing this for quite some time. He was questioning the FDA officials over the harmful effects of red dye. Take a look.
Let me say this, red 3 has been known to cause cancer in cosmetics, but we still allow it to be put in our food. I don't understand that. Go ahead.
So red 3, we have a petition in front of us to revoke the authorization for it, and we are hopeful that within the next few weeks we will be acting on that petition, and a decision should be forthcoming.
So you hear it, like cosmetics, right? They've banned it in cosmetics, so you can't put this on your skin. Yet they let us go on ingesting this for however many more decades after this. I want to take this, though, into a bigger picture with you, because there are so many other dyes, right? We can say this is a victory for red dye 3, but then there's red dye 40 and yellow 5 and everything. So how do you see this advancing from this point on?
So that's where this is difficult, right? Because we can ban red number 3, but like you said, there's red 40. So they can replace it with all of these other chemicals that are not being banned. And there are a few that you do need to look out for. Brominated vegetable oil, that's in a lot of your sodas, your fruit-flavored beverages, your sports drinks. BHA, that's in your butter, your lard, your meats, your baked goods. Potassium bromate, that's in like over 200 products, like your packaged bread. There are a lot. Titanium dioxide, that's something they use. And in fact, I found titanium dioxide in a lip balm I was using last night. And they use that to make things appear.
And Hillary's healthy.
I know. I was
she
like,
goes through
why do I
all
have
this
this? It
stuff.
went straight in the trash. But they use that also to make things appear bright and white. And they also use it as a primer for using the other food dyes on top of it to make the colors really pop. So there are a bunch of these different things, and you've got to learn what they are, because here's the crux of it. If we're going to eliminate these from our lives, there are 2 things we can do. We can learn what these are and read labels and be diligent about reading labels, or you can just buy whole foods, organic foods, which is tough to do in a busy world when you're getting a lot of prepackaged on-the-go snacks and food. But those are really our 2 options at this point. And one of the bigger problems is these have various names. So we call it like red number 3, but it also has a more scientific name, like a longer name that no one can pronounce. And as long as a company puts one of those names on the packaging, the FDA says that's good. So you often don't know that it's got a red dye in it or blue number 5 if you don't know the other names for the chemical.
Yeah, but once it gets past like 10 letters in the word, you know it's probably not good for you.
Yes.
Well, that's why they do it, right? They know like red dye number whatever sounds better than all those scientific names that sound terrifying. And increasingly we learn that we should be terrified of this stuff because it's so unnatural. So looking forward at a potentially, RFK Jr. and all the new people coming in, what most excites you about what could possibly happen when it comes to these issues during the Trump administration?
I'm so excited about this because I think just making the American public aware is huge, because I think most people don't know what's in their food. The average American doesn't read a lot of labels. You're at the grocery store, you're busy, you're not going to sit and read every label. But I think having him speak out on these issues will make people think twice about how many processed things they eat, what kind of foods they give their kids, because again, all of these dyes are linked to major hyperactivity, ADHD, ADD in children. It's causing major problems within our schools and within our families. So I'm excited that they are pushing this to the front where we're at least aware and thinking about it. But also, you can contact and you can lobby on your own, right? Like you can call the FDA. They have a phone number. In fact, I have it here somewhere where you can call them and you can file a complaint and you can say, hey, I don't want this in my food anymore, which I think is great. It's, where is it? It's like 1-888-INFO-FDA.
Put it on your Twitter.
So you can do that. Yes, I'll put it online. But I think the best thing we can all do is our money talks.
Yep.
Don't buy these products. Don't buy the Fruit Loops. Don't buy the Skittles. Don't buy the M&Ms. And then these companies will be forced to make changes, because we've seen that with lots of different bans throughout the last 4 years, where people have banded together and said, we're not going to put our money towards this company if it doesn't align with our values.
My niece and nephew have a huge piggy bank right now. They know that they want to go out there and that's how they want to spend their money. But you have to go through and eat more protein and eat less food out of a box. Hilary?
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be back to wrap up the show right after this. Well, we're trying to get everybody healthy, trying to get them off of the food dyes. But I loved, Matthew, the conversation that we had when we had Clare on with humanality and trying to just make sure that you get off your phone for a little while, even if it's just going to be for a weekend or two. I think adults, it shouldn't just be college kids. It should also be adults that challenge themselves to do this.
Yeah, look, this is a civilizational problem at this point. And in the next 5 years, you're going to see more and more data come out. Write this down, okay? In the next 5 years, you're going to see more and more data come out that's going to show you what these things are doing to our brains, especially young people's brains, but everyone's brains, is worse than smoking, worse than drug use of many kinds. It's really, really bad. And so that's why it was great to talk about humanality. What Claire and I neglected to mention is that the app Halo, the prayer app Halo, that's a video game. Yeah. The prayer app Halo has a digital detox that Humanality has put on there that you can find for free online. It's just digital detox at Humanality. And it's basically a whole program sort of explaining just how to live a better life and lay off the phones in a way that makes sense. It's not like a crazy like you just get rid of all technology, but it's a way to, if you're feeling it, a program you can take. Very helpful, very good for mindfulness, they call it these days, but just clarity of thought,
Yeah, no, and that's so important. And I love that they go through and give you a plan, because some people are like, well, I want to do it, but
Yes.
I don't know how to get started. I want to get your take quickly, though, on the top news stories of the day. It is confirmation season in the Senate. Pam Bondi is going to be the one getting all of the headlines, but Russ Vought might be the person that you don't know about that might have the biggest amount of power.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, everyone loves Pam Bondi. I mean, who doesn't? She's a lovable person. She's done some amazing stuff. She's competent. But the jury's out on what she's going to do. She has to go in there and truly understand that she can't do what happened last time. She has to gut DOJ and remake it. So, I'm a huge fan. I hope she does it. On the other end of it today, Russ Vought, we already know about him. He already did this before. He was in charge of OMB. A lot of regular people don't even know what the hell that is. The Office of Management Budget is within the White House, and it's complex, and it's very, very important because it controls the money. And Russ is someone who, as anyone will tell you, is a principled guy who's really going to do the deal. He understands the MAGA agenda. He doesn't care what the media thinks. He's already done it before. He's going to go in there and kick ass.
And that's why they were coming at him and attacking him today in the Senate hearings, because they know that he is effective, and they do not want an effective person by Donald Trump's side, especially when it's going to be coming to the management and the budget. It's going to be an interesting transition time, and we'll be back out there in D.C. for the inauguration, and we'll be here, though, back with you in Dallas to break everything for you down tomorrow.